Well, to discuss the developments of the past number of days, I'm delighted to welcome onto the programme a number of guests. Patricia Chagnon, a regional councillor for the National Rally Party in France. Chris Phillips, former head of the UK National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. And Mohammed Shafiq, chief executive of the Ramadhan Foundation in the UK. Thanks very much for making the time, especially on a Sunday, to speak to us today. Patricia, can we kick off with you? The French president's stance on Islam has sparked anger throughout the Muslim world. We've seen many images of that. I put it to you that they're standing up for free speech, and then there's simply provocation that history suggests will only lead in one direction. Is his plan perhaps well-intentioned, but actually a danger to French citizens?
I think that the French president, was very right to confirm that we stand for a secular state and for the freedom of speech. Might I also add, which is very important if you want to understand the debate that's going on, in the secular state of France, religion is seen as an opinion. It is an opinion, as you can have an opinion on many other things in society, and it is treated as an opinion. And this is what actually the school teacher was trying to explain. Samuel Paty was trying to explain to the school children he was teaching that we think that the way that religions can coexist peacefully in society is in this secular way of treating them as an opinion that we respect, but an opinion of which we can, disagree, maybe have mockery. And it is your choice if you want to then listen to it or what you want to do with it. But that is the way that we treat it in our states. I think what has happened over the past couple of years and what has accelerated the movement and what's causing the big outcry in many Muslim countries, and I might, first of all, pay tribute to my fellow French countrymen, the millions of French countrymen of Muslim faith who are my fellow countrymen and whom I adore and with whom we live in the secular state. I think it has been the ambiguity that our politicians have had with regards to Islam or Islamism. Let's not confuse the two. What Mr. Macron said and what France needs to do is combat Islamism, the radical Islam, which has got foothold in France over the last 30 years. Okay. We have seen over the past 30 years, women wearing veils everywhere. We see now patients refusing to be treated by a doctor of the opposite sex. We have separate swimming hours. We have a radical Islam that has infiltrated all corners of society and which is causing this problem and this upflame of unrest.
Chris, ever since the Charlie Hebdo massacre in early 2015, France has been cracking down on Islamic extremists. Judging by recent events, do you think, for all intents and purposes, they've failed?
Well, it's a pretty impossible battle, actually, because there's such an easy movement across the continent and from one continent to the other. And this man that's committed the latest attack has just come over recently in the last few weeks. So it's an impossible task to actually prevent these attacks from happening by the sheer weight of numbers of those that have got these extremist views.
We also have Mohammed Shafiq from the Ramadhan Foundation in the UK on the programme. Mohammed, going back to those protests in the Muslim world, so much anger about the cartoons, Macron's stance on radical Islamism. But we don't see anyone rioting, do we, over the beheading of the teacher? There's no collective overall denouncing. Priorities here are wrong, aren't they?
Well, I think if you look at what the reaction has been in France and has been in this country, there are many of us who are standing up and speaking up, despite the threats that we may get from some extremist groups. I think it's very clear. You can never justify terrorism or violence of any sort. And I think you've got to be very, very clear about that. But what is the issue with President Macron and his war on Islam is that it's a terminology that he's adopted, which is a them and a us, in which he tarnishes every single Muslim and holds Muslims responsible for the action of a small minority of terrorists. And so, yeah, if there is a process of bringing communities together, I think that is what we should be doing. And here in the UK, you see that time and time again in the reaction from prime ministers and politicians, and certainly community organisations like ourselves, that when we need to come together, we have that opportunity to stand together against terrorism and eradicate and do whatever we can towards that. but where we need to stand up and speak and defend our faith and defend the honor of our Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, through democratic and peaceful methods, that is something which we do and we should be encouraged to do.
Well, let's put one of those points to Patricia. Patricia, can you understand that ordinary, moderate Muslims, the millions of them in your country, feel under attack by the president's words? Again, I would suggest not Mr. Macron's intention at all, but the communication, the way, the vociferousness of it to their ears has been threatening. It's the wrong way to do this, Patricia.
Well, let's just correct this. My Muslim friends in France don't at all feel threatened by Mr. Macron's words. It's the contrary. The moderate Muslims in France are feeling threatened by the radical Islam, which is getting a foothold in France. We need to address radical Islam in France, and we are in a war against radical Islam. And I don't think Mr. Macron is going far enough, and I don't think that Mr. Chris Phillips really grasps the problem in France. First of all, the Tunisian terrorists that arrived in France only a couple of days, apparently, prior to his horrendous decapitational act. We need to close our radical mosques. We have 4,000 mosques in France, of which a little over 500 have been identified as radical mosques, where Salafitism is preached, where these should be closed. We need to deport foreigners who preach Islam on our grounds. We have radical imams preaching hatred speeches against France.
Islam on your grounds. What do you mean by that?
I can't hear you.
So I'm just asking a question. What do you mean by that? When you say preach Islam?
What I mean by that is by hate speeches against the Western way of living, against the secular way of living. We have preachers who preach the fact that we should preserve children, notably from these types of teachings that we have in our secular schools. So we cannot have people preaching an Islam which wants to fight our society, our secular society, or much worse, is calling for living according to very radical and rigorous Islamic rules. We have a lot of mosques which are now telling Muslim
just let Mohammed get in there and reply briefly, and then I'll go to Chris. Mohammed, go ahead.
I just want to finish my sentence.
I just
we
really
have
believe
too many
what you're
mosques.
just hearing from a counsellor. What you are actually hearing.
Excuse me. I was asked to ask the question. We have a lot of mosques, and we have a lot. Please respect women, sir. We have a lot of mosques in France that are now telling women that they should not. We have men not shaking women's hands. We have mosques preaching for separate swimming hours. We have young girls being told to put on the veil. This is not what we want in French society.
Is this a Le Pen approved message that we're listening to on Russia Today?
This is not supposed to take place in France.
Yeah. Well, I mean, stop patronising me and talking about, what you're talking about. You just sound like as if you're talking from the National Front and the agenda of the far right. We, as Muslims, recognise we have a problem. There are people amongst our midst. I accept this. There's a problem with people who are involved in terrorism, glorifying it, supporting it, and financing it. And I think that's what we've got to confront on. And President Macron, if he wants to work with the Muslim community in France, but around the world as well, to identify the people involved in that. Chris will know this from his background in counter-terrorism. The only way effectively you can stop this is from intelligence from within the Muslim community. And so we want to work with people to do that. But adopting this sort of rhetoric and the language that we've seen on your programme just suits the agenda of the far right and demonises the whole community. And that is something which we reject.
Absolutely.
Okay, hold on, Patricia. Let me bring Chris in. Chris, do you think that the French crackdown on Islamism, including the law against religious separatism, could serve as a template for other countries? We've seen European leaders stand in solidarity, give comments with Macron, but no action so far, and it doesn't look as if they're willing to go as far as he is. Do you think they should?
Well, first and foremost, can I say, nothing I actually heard from Macron is really attacking Islam and moderate Muslims in France. What I think he's trying to do is say, look, we have a country here. We've had laws and regulations that we've built up over centuries, and this is how this country works. And actually, those extremists who have a completely different view of how they want life to be and maybe separate into their own type of society, then France is probably not for them. And to some extent, I totally agree with that. And other countries need to be a bit more vociferous, because this problem is not a France-only problem. This is a whole European, a whole Western issue, that there are certain groups of people, extremists in society, that do not accept the laws of the land, and how the French and the Germans, the British and the Belgians and the Dutch believe that they should live. And if they don't want to do that, if they want to have a different form, if they want to have a more extreme view of life, then really France isn't for them, and other countries should be standing up to this as well. That said, the whole point of this is that the average Muslim person in the UK, France, or anywhere else wants to live a peaceful life. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Mohammed,
Absolutely.
one issue I want to bring up as well. The terrorist in Nice arrived into Europe just days before his killing spree. He crossed by boat from Tunisia to Italy, where he was served a deportation order, yet he was able to travel to France. If Europe had not let him in, or at least there were more stringent things in place to check who he was, there could be 3 people alive today that are dead. Do you accept that language about immigration, people calling it xenophobic, that this is a direct case of those policies being failed?
Well, I think there's 2 things here. One is that Macron is about to have a presidential election, so he's reaching out to the far right and trying to adopt the language of the Front National, and Marine Le Pen and others, and we see that in the rhetoric that we've seen. Now, Chris himself might not be saying that this is with a security background, saying this is doesn't see what he says and the impact it has on Muslims and the faith of Islam. As a Muslim, practicing Muslim, I was deeply offended by his language and the rhetoric. Adopting the language of the far right is never the way to deal with this issue. Now, I think
but it's
that
not
there
really
is
far right to say that people should. The laws of
there is. Well, I'm not going to have you, Chris, tell me what I feel and the impact, the language of people. Excuse me, madam, just show some respect, like you were asking me to respect you. But don't interrupt me, please. So I'm not going to have people tell me what I should feel as a Muslim. I've already said to you, and I've said this consistently in my public life as an activist, fighting against terrorism, subject to the death threats from Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, that we're on the front line fighting these terrorists, the ideology and the narrative. And language is very, very important. And all I'm saying is people should reflect on that language. And if you want to build an alliance, if you want to bring people, decent people who are against terrorism, come together, let's do that. But let's do away with this rhetoric that we're hearing tonight.
Patricia?
Yes. Just to react to Mr. Shafiq, Mr. Shafiq, you ought to know that many mosques in France are preaching and saying that the laws of the Quran are superior to the laws of France.
And this is just not.
Excuse me, can you please let me finish my sentence? Thank you so much.
The thing is,
please.
No,
I have done this for you. I'm happy to send them to you.
Pass your far-right rhetoric.
Okay, Mohammed, just let Patricia have. Patricia, go ahead for 20 seconds, then we want to get to Chris because we're rapidly running out of time here. Yeah. Patricia, go ahead, but be brief.
Far-right rhetoric.
Yes, I would like to say that we of course agree with the stance that Mr. Macron made for free speech in France, but we think he needs to go further. We need to curb those radical Islamist mosques in France. We need to deport people who preach or who condone Islamist terrorism. We need to strip binationals of their nationality if they do condone terrorism. We need to construct special prisons for the French people who engage in acts of terrorism, and we must hold mass immigration, which is a feeding ground, which is a feeding ground of radical Islam.
Out of your vocabulary. That should show you just focus on demonizing a whole community. You've not mentioned anything about the far right. You've not mentioned anything about the massive rise of far right extremism across Europe.
Okay, hold on. We need to let Chris get in as well here. Chris, is there a danger that any attempts to crush radical Islam? Hold on, please. Chris, is there a danger that any attempts to crush radical Islam will simply play into the hands of terrorists by causing a rift between Muslims and the rest of the population? This is the core of the matter, isn't it?
Yeah, that is a problem. And let me tell you, this is not going to be solved over 5-10 years. This is a generational issue. But we have to deal with the people, and whether it's the far right, the far left, or actually Islamic extremists, people that want to live outside the law have to make a choice. Do they want to live in that country or not? If they don't, then they should either be prosecuted or they should return to a country where they can live as they want to live. The freedoms of France, Europe have come over generations. What concerns me is even a good many of the what you would consider completely normal people, normal Muslims, actually are so insulted by these cartoons that they actually think violence is the answer, and that surely is a concern for all of us.
OK, we're just going to go to our final thoughts from each of you. Patricia, we really have about 20 seconds here. OK,
I'll make it very short. France is a country where all religions can peacefully live together. And I live together with millions of Muslims and have many Muslim friends who are enlightened Muslims and whom I adore. We can exist all together in France under the condition that our traditions and laws of secularism are respected. The problem today is that we have gone too far in being lenient into bowing our heads to radical Islamists having installed themselves on French ground. This needs to be banned, and we hope that Mr. Macron is going to have some very firm actions to definitely ban radical Islam from the soil of France.
Mohammed.
Well, I mean, just heard some of the rhetoric we hear and the language of division that is not wanted here. Yes, we all want an end to terrorism. We want to protect France. We want to protect the Middle East. Anywhere in the world where there is terrorism, we've got to confront it and call it for what it is. But what's interesting on this debate, a total focus about the threat from within the margins of the Muslim community, but very little about the massive rise of far-right extremism in Germany, in France, here in the UK and around the world. So yeah, let's be consistent. Let's take on the narrative of terrorists, but don't do that at the expense of ordinary innocent Muslims around the world. We abhor terrorism, but we also want the right, for our voice to be heard in these countries and our faith not to be attacked in the way it has been tonight.
Chris Phillips.
Yeah, well, we all feel the same, really, that it's all extremes that need to be dealt with. And the police are having to deal with the rise in right-wing extremism. But at this moment today, we're talking about people being beheaded in churches and basilicas and things across France. That's the issue that France is having to deal with at this moment. And it's not acceptable for a country like that, who have free values, to have people that are willing within their own communities and wanting to live a separate type of lifestyle with separate laws. And if they don't get their way, are willing to cope to violence to deal with it. So terrorism is an awful thing, but this particular problem is what France is trying to deal with at this moment.
Well, plenty of food for thought in that discussion. We've been speaking to Patricia Chagnon, a regional councillor for the National Rally Party in France, Chris Phillips, former head of the UK National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, and Mohammed Shafiq, chief executive of the Ramadan Foundation in the UK. Thank you all.